Hello everyone, I'm Hunter Huxley, and this is the Prepper Papers. Today is our second video in a three-part series on bushcraft survival. If you are curious about the two best types of bushcraft shelter to build, look no further. This down and dirty guide provides detailed instructions for building both a simple lean-to shelter and a more advanced round lodge design for long-term use. We make a new video every week covering different types of tips, gear, and everyday survival practices. If you want to see more videos like this, or if you enjoy this one, be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with the latest in everything a prepper needs to know in the modern day. If you find yourself in a survival situation and you realize you might have to spend the night, it will probably be a good idea to build a bushcraft shelter to stay warm and to protect yourself from animal encounters. Investing the calories and time into building an improvised shelter isn't always a great idea, however, especially if you can stay warm and plan to self-rescue the next day. At the very least, you should make a bed out of evergreen tree boughs to keep you off of the cold ground and to conserve body heat. So what is a bushcraft shelter, and what is the best way to build one? Intended to protect a survivor from the elements and predatory animals, a bushcraft shelter is any habitation that is made from materials found in a wild setting. They can also incorporate tarps and other found objects, and are specifically designed for the environment they are built in. There are an infinite number of bushcraft shelter designs, because each one is improvised from the materials at hand. There are two general designs that anyone who is planning on spending time in a wooded backcountry setting should know, however, the lean-to and the round lodge. A quick note about bushcraft shelters: any discussion of primitive shelters should be prefaced by the importance of following the leave no trace principles. If you choose to build a shelter in the woods, make it out of fallen timber if at all possible, and only cut evergreen boughs if you are in a productive forest that can easily recover. Don't assume that future visitors will be stoked to run across your shelter, either. Dismantle anything you build and scatter the materials before you leave. Lean-to shelter. A lean-to is exactly what it sounds like, an improvised bushcraft shelter made by fastening a horizontal ridge pole between two objects, usually trees, and then leaning straight branches perpendicular to the pole to create a wall that blocks the wind and rain. The steps for building a lean-to are fairly intuitive. Choose a location that is naturally sheltered, if possible, and not at the bottom of a valley or depression where cold air will accumulate. Look for natural objects that can support a ridge pole. Rock outcroppings can serve as windbreaks and complement the lean-to design very well. If there are no objects to support a ridge pole, select two straight timbers and set them vertically into the ground about 6 to 7 feet apart. Select a straight ridge pole that is 6 to 7 feet long and lash it to the support structure. Lean straight timbers along the upwind side of the ridge pole. Use the longest timbers available to provide the greatest amount of space underneath them. Gather fresh-cut evergreen boughs, leaves, or moss and carefully place them into the leaning timbers. Place cut boughs under the lean-to for bedding, and designate a location just outside for a fire pit. For prolonged use, consider adding a second tier of timbers on the opposite side to create an A-frame design. Covering your lean-to shelter with a tarp, mylar blanket, or poncho will provide better protection from the elements. The pros of a lean-to bushcraft shelter: a lean-to is an efficient wind block, and provides protection from the sun and weather. If well insulated, a lean-to will help conserve warmth. Lean-tos are very simple to build out of easily sourced materials. The cons of a lean-to bushcraft shelter: lean-tos don't provide a lot of protection if the wind direction shifts. Lean-tos provide little to no protection from animal attacks. Not a good choice for sheltering more than one person, or for long-term use. Round lodge shelter. The round lodge design is based on the long-term shelters used by indigenous peoples throughout historic and prehistoric times. The most familiar variations to Westerners are the teepees and wickiups used by native Plains and Southwest tribes, while similar shapes are still widely used by many groups around the world, including the Sami people in Scandinavia and the Evenks in North Asia. Many of these structures are much more complex, or serve more cultural purposes, than a simple bushcraft shelter. This makes the generic term round lodge the best choice for this design. A round lodge is slightly more complex than a lean-to. If there is a natural windbreak present, consider building your structure around it to gain its benefits. Source several long, thin poles, about 15 to 18 feet in length. Young pine trees work best for this design. Lash the three longest poles together, about 18 inches from one end. Carefully lift the pole skyward, with the lashed end at the top, and gradually extend the three poles outward to make a standing triangle shape. Lean more poles, in equal distances apart, against the others. Leave one downwind area open for a doorway. Place timbers across the top of this area to support whichever outer covering you choose, and hang a piece of fabric or use tree boughs to cover the door. Decide how to cover the structure. A large tarp is best, or you can continue stacking poles against each other, or weave green tree branches horizontally between the upright poles. If using timbers or sticks to cover the lodge, weave moss, grass, leaves, or evergreen boughs into the walls to provide insulation. Make bedding out of evergreen boughs, and dig out a small fire pit in the center of the structure. The pros of a round lodge bushcraft shelter. This design naturally sheds water and is resistant to wind. A round lodge is easy to build in a mountainous region. Good for a group of 3 to 4 people. The cons of a round lodge bushcraft shelter. This structure requires several long, straight timbers. Doesn't trap body heat very well, so a fire is required for warmth. Having a large fire inside is risky. Natural materials like leaves and brush will need to be replaced often. While building these bushcraft shelters is fairly easy, remember to always make the best use of your surroundings and any available materials. Many survivalists choose to carry a hatchet for the exact purpose of constructing a bushcraft shelter similar to the ones discussed above. A hatchet makes a great addition to your camping or general outdoors use. They can be used in a variety of ways: building a shelter, splitting kindling, shaving tinder, driving tent stakes, chopping into ice, cleaning limbs and shaving bark, fire starting, processing wild game. If you're still listening, thank you for making it to the end of part 2 of our 3-part bushcraft survival series. I'd like you to know that we truly appreciate your viewership. If you enjoy our content, consider subscribing or signing up for our newsletter using the link in the description. As always, I'm Hunter Huxley, this is the Prepper Papers, and we'll see you next time.